Hi everyone, thought I would create a quick demonstration here about what the difference between absolute and relative positioning is in CSS. To start with on this screen, I'm going to talk about absolute positioning, which is positioning of an element based on the point of origin, or the top 0 pixels and the left 0 pixels of that absolutely positioned child's parent element, and that's the key in this statement. In this example, I'm showing up here in the upper part of the screen some truncated HTML code real quick, and here in the gray with the bold-faced text is the corresponding CSS of how you would actually demonstrate the absolute positioning. So you've got your body tag and you've got a div called child of body. It's an ID. It's got a positioning of absolute on it with a 0, 0, a background color of this blue-violet purplish color, and a white text color. Since that has a 0, 0, and this div is a direct child of the body, it's not nested inside of something else, then this paragraph within the div and the blue-violet background color is going to be positioned exactly in the 0, 0 point of this overall little browser window. That only appears in that location because child of body is a direct child of the body. The body is the parent element of this div. Whereas in the next example down, you'll notice that I've got a div with an ID equals parent, and then another div that's inside of this, nested inside, called child underscore nested, with text that says this nested div is a child of the parent div. Parent is positioned absolutely 150 pixels down from the top and 150 pixels over from the left, as demonstrated with these dashed lines here. So that has an absolute positioning since body is the parent of this ID div called parent. It's actually a child of body. Now when you get down to the nested one, if you position that absolutely and you give it a 0, 0, child nested does not have body as its parent. It actually has a div that it's inside of as its parent. So this is the parent-child relationship is between these two, and body is just like, would be considered, I guess you could say, a grandparent of these, but there is no such thing as grandparenting in CSS, so you just have to worry about parent and child relationships. So when you put a top of 0 and a left of 0 on this one with the red background, it does not appear up here in the upper left corner because body is not its parent. This one called parent, this div called parent, is actually the parent of the one called child underscore nested. So it appears right where the 0, 0 point of the one called parent is located at, which is 150 pixels down, 150 pixels over from the left. Gets a little bit different when you start talking about relative positioning. Relative positioning in CSS is positioning of an element based on the previous statically positioned element. The key here is that the element prior to the one that you're trying to position must be statically positioned. Either it has not actually had a position declared in the CSS, like most HTML and CSS code normally is. When you type in an H1, if you haven't decided to position it somewhere, it's just positioned statically. It just appears where it appears on the screen. So in this example, again, we've got HTML code at the top and CSS down here. In this case, we've got an H1 that says this is my header 1. And we've got an ID on a div called relative with a text that says this div is relative to the previous statically positioned element. This is positioned at the 0, 0 point and relative, the navy blue background with the white text. It appears down slightly below. It's not going to appear at the 0, what you would think would be the 0, 0 point of the heading, because it's being positioned relative to that heading, not absolutely. It doesn't appear directly below the header because you have to remember that H1s, all the headers and all paragraphs, unless otherwise overwritten in your CSS, they're all block level elements. In other words, they are display : block. And when you have a block level element like a header, it automatically puts a little bit of margin underneath the heading. So really the 0, point would be right around in this area here, which is where this purple or navy colored box would start. The next one down is a heading 2 called This Is My Header. Relative to, this div is relative to the previously static position element, which again is this H2. The H2 is in the same case. It will have a little bit of margin underneath it because it's a block level element. So unless you specified that you wanted all of your headings, or in this case the H2, to be a display : inline, it's going to give you a little bit of space underneath there like it normally would for headers. In this case, we've positioned this one relative to 50 down from the top and 50 from the left. So it's coming over and it's coming down into this position. So I hope that clarifies some confusion about the absolute versus the relative. Remember, relative is always going to be positioned relative to in the HTML code, the previous statically positioned element. So if you have a bunch of absolutely positioned elements and then a relative one at the bottom, the relative one is always going to be positioned relative to the previous statically positioned one, which might be the very first element, your heading 1 at the very top of your page. Maybe all of your elements are positioned absolutely, and so it will actually be positioned relative to the body. Whereas in the absolute, that actually works off of the difference between the nested parent and child relationships. Absolute is always nested off of the body if that is the parent of those elements, like this div. But if you have a nested relationship like these two divs, this one becomes the parent, the top div, and this one becomes the child.